Hey everyone. So your build is starting to slow down, or maybe you just made it into maps and someone told you to fix your resistances. But how do you actually find upgrades? There are really three main ways: drops, crafting, or buying. And drops are the most straightforward, but you have to just be lucky to get exactly what you want. Crafting is powerful, but you need to know what gear slots can roll what stats and which slots are great for filling your resist gaps. And then there's buying, which requires you to know how to search effectively. The only thing I can say about drops is the higher level of content and the harder content, the better the drops are on average. But if you're ready to buy or craft, I can help you get started. Let's dive in. So, first things first, before we dig into it, you've got to figure out what you're looking for. And to figure out what you're looking for, there's a couple different things. For offensive, you want to look at what skills you're using to do damage, which I'm using mortar cannon here to do my damage. Mortar cannon has the grenade tag. You can see up here grenade, duration, and meta, and totem. So abilities and stats that affect these tags will affect this skill. But the damage is actually done by cluster grenade, which has the area effect, projectile, grenade, fire, and attack tags. So things that make you do more attack damage will help. We'll add to this skill. Anything that affects area effect, maybe area effect size or area effect damage will affect this. Projectile damage will affect this. So the tags are very important for knowing what will affect your skills. But you're not just looking for offenses. Arguably more important is defenses. So if you look at your character, there are a couple different things that you need to pay attention to on your character. First off is I'm going life based, so I have as much life as I can get at this point. I have a little bit of energy shield. I'm not really focusing on energy shield. I don't have any bonuses to energy shield, so that's kind of there as a little bonus, but for the most part isn't doing very much. I'm doing a build that doesn't use or even have mana, so I don't have to worry about mana, but you might have to worry about mana, especially if your build is very mana intensive. And then you pick usually one of the three main defenses: armor, evasion, and energy shield. Sometimes you will combine the two. Energy shield evasion is a very common pair. It's very powerful. I'm going mainly armor. And when you go armor, there's a new stat available this season that I have some on my helmet. 29% of armor also applies to elemental damage. That helps with your armor not being kind of a one-trick pony that only does physical damage. It also is helping with elemental damage as well, which feels actually pretty good. So I'm able to focus mainly on armor. I would like to see this number a little bit higher, but 77% is good enough for me to be pretty comfortable in tier 15s. And then there's the big ones below here: fire resistance, lightning resistance, cold resistance, and chaos resistance. For the most part, you want to have your fire, lightning, and cold capped pretty much as soon as possible. The default cap is 75%. If you can, going for even more than 75% is nice. The 75% is the default cap, but there's ways to move that up to a maximum of 90%. And while that doesn't sound like much, it's like, well, I got 75%, 90 is only 15% more, but 90% is more damage reduction than the previous 75%. So it does make quite a bit of difference going a little bit more than that, but I'm doing okay with just 75%, and that's really all you need, especially when you're first getting into maps. And then chaos resist is its own thing. There are less chaos skills out there. Chaos skills also often bypass energy shield, so they're a little bit more dangerous, especially if you're an energy shield build. So having some chaos resist is nice, but most of the time you probably aren't going to have any, especially when you're first getting into maps, and that's not really a big deal. It's more of a goal as you have more money, as you have better gear, you want to work it in there. My last upgrades that I did is I did get my chaos capped, and it does feel better It means that you're not punished as much for not dodging some of the chaos stuff, but it really isn't necessary. I was doing tier 15s before I got my chaos capped. It just is more comfortable once you can. Then, again, I'm life based, so I got as much life as possible. I'm doing where my skills cost life. So you can see as I'm casting my skills, my life is going down. And so you want to have some recovery if you're doing that as well, so that you're not dying to casting your own skills. But most people aren't using blood magic, so you don't really have to worry about that. And the last couple of things to consider are a lot of skills scale off of your weapon damage. So weapons are all about offense. So you can scale this as much as possible. You want to have as much damage as you can if you're playing a skill that does scale off weapon damage. Also, what uniques does your build use? My build is using this unique amulet, which has skills have +1 to limit. That's really important for this build. It's worth giving up additional stats to have that. So I use this unique amulet. Everything else is rare, which means it's craftable. How did I come up with using this amulet? Well, in this particular case, I like to follow build guides. So I have a build guide I've been following. This build guide has a gear section. Most build guides do. And it goes over what slots do you want to look for what abilities. And then there's some additional notes even in this build guide, which is nice. So in this guide, I can see that I do want specifically ornate plate for body armor. Why do I want the ornate plate? Well, it's because it base provides significant life regeneration. If I were to look over my character and look at my ornate plate, regenerate 2.5% of maximum life per second. That's a max roll on that. If you hold Alt, you can see that it rolls between 1.5 and 2.5. So that life regen is important, again, because I use my life to cast my skills. I want my life to be constantly regenning. 2.5% is pretty good, and it's worth giving up some like high level armor to get that. But also the helmet, you just want armor on it. Gloves, you just want armor. Boots, you just want armor. And then they break down some stat priorities. This is where they tell me specifically that I want one of these 2 crossbows. And the reason I want these crossbows is because they have this implicit grenade skills, fire, and additional projectile. So following a guide, they've done a lot of the heavy lifting and figuring out what the best way to go is. And this additional projectile does more damage than the fact that there are bows that have higher base damage than these crossbows. So it usually is the case. Additional projectiles are usually worth it, but that's not always the case. This also has a maxed version of the guide, where he only changes one piece of gear, but sometimes it'll be a whole new set of gear. Some build guides will have gear for this is what you expect while you're leveling, early maps, late maps. Some go into great detail of Act 1, you want to be looking at this. Act 2, you want to be looking at that. Generally, during the acts, you don't really need to pay that much attention to it, but knowing what way you're going is nice, and the build guide helps you with that. And then to compare another build guide, this is for an entirely different build on a different website. It has a similar section where it talks about gear, and it has some notes about it. It has a couple different versions. There's a leveling version. You can see there's a lot of uniques in the leveling version. I like this because I don't always know which uniques are good for leveling a specific build. Some of these uniques are more generic. But you don't need these to level your character. But if you're leveling a second or third character and you have, 50 exalts, these pieces of gear will probably cost you less than 20 exalts total to buy all the uniques and have kind of a better, faster leveling experience on that character and really push through the axe a little bit faster. You don't really need these uniques to level this character. This character, I know, does pretty well. But also the specific base, he's listing a soaring mask here. That specific base is not necessarily required. Some people get really caught up on having, I want a soaring mask because the guide says soaring mask. Well, the soaring mask might be the highest tier of this mask, of this helmet slot. It is at its core an evasion energy shield base. You can see how it says 146 evasion and 55 energy shield. That means that it has evasion energy shield as a base, and you can really just grab any evasion energy shield base that has enough evasion energy shield for wherever you're at in the game, and has the stats that you want. You want the higher tier bases that have the more evasion and the more energy shield as you can get it, but especially if you're not level 75 yet. This says requires level 75. You might not even be able to wear this helmet. Or maybe you don't have the stats to wear the helmet yet, because you don't have 59 int on this character yet, and the helmet requires int. So if you don't have the stats for it, you might not be able to wear specifically that base. But usually that doesn't matter as much as the fact that it's evasion energy shield, because that's the defenses you're going towards. And you want as much as you can get for the budget you have, but often the base itself doesn't matter. The exception is when an item has an implicit on it that is something that you care about. And I'll look back at my character quick, and we'll go over what an implicit is really quick. If you're looking at a piece of gear, you can see this bow has a few things on it. There's the top bit that is just the base description. It's a crossbow. It does this much damage. You can see the damage is in blue. That means it's being modified by something. Critical hit chance is 5. It's not in blue. That's this weapon's base critical hit. Base attacks per second. Reload time. Those are all part of the weapon. Next step is the requirements. This requires level 79. It has a strength and dex requirement, again in blue because they're modified. You can see in the stats below, there's a 30% reduced attribute requirements. That's why those are lower than they normally be. Then there's the light blue that says 30% increased physical damage. Those are the runes that I have it put into the weapon. And then there is, the 2 bars, and then there's grenades, skills, fire, and additional projectile. That is the implicit on this weapon. Every siege crossbow has this implicit. So that is very important for this build. It gives me so much more damage that I want to make sure that this bow has, or that I'm using a bow that has this. Now there are 3 crossbows that have this ability, so I could use any one of them, but I want to use the highest one that does the most damage that I can at the level I am. So, and with the stats that I have. So the implicit is important here. Which one I want isn't strictly important, but you want the highest you can get. Same with body armor. I believe this is the only body armor that has life regen. So I do want exactly this body armor because it's implicit in its life regen. But the rest of the gear, I just care that it has armor. I don't care that these are vol mitts. Doesn't matter to me. I don't care that this is a warrior great helm. Didn't matter to me. In fact, these boots, while I'm looking for just armor, had a lot of armor, but also had energy shield. That's where I've got my energy shield from. I don't care that it has energy shield. It just had enough armor for me and had the stats I was looking for. So don't get too caught up about the specific piece of gear unless that piece of gear has an implicit that your build is looking for. So when you're looking at a piece of gear to start crafting, early on, you're mainly probably found something on the ground that has a couple of stats that are good for you, and you want to just make it a little bit better. So maybe I found this bow, this bow I found around level 37. You can see it says item level 37 at the top. I might want to just make this bow a little bit better. Well, since it's a blue bow that only has 1 stat on it, my next step would just be to augment it. So I just right click this augment, click it on here, and hopefully got something I like. This time, I got something that I don't really care about. Well, the next step after this would be to regal it, but I'm going to hold off. We want to go to a website called Craft of Exile, and make sure we're on PoE 2's version. And here we can see what stats can be on here. So if I look back at my item, look at this wand. This is a withered wand, item level 1. What can that even have? So if we look at one-handed weapons, chaos wand, item level 1. These are the only things this wand can even get. Is there anything that I even care to get on this? I'm looking at this, increased spell damage and cast speed are the only things I care about. So let's see if I get them. If I do a transmutation on it, I got intelligence, that's a suffix. Well, when I go to augment it, I'm only going to get prefixes, so I'm looking for spell damage. I've already got my suffix full, looking for prefixes. So then I augment it. I got 12 to maximum mana. At this point, I really wouldn't even worry about doing anything more. This base is done. I didn't get a suffix I want. I didn't get a prefix I want. There's really no saving this base. But if this is really early on, I don't have a lot going for me, maybe I'll regal it just to be sure. And I'll regal it, and I got mana regeneration. Absolute garbage. You know, that was just a waste of currency at that point. So, I didn't get what I wanted. That's how crafting goes with the randomness. If I didn't want to regal that, what I could have done, if you've gotten some essences, is you can use essences to craft from a magic to a rare, guaranteeing a specific modifier. So let's say I want to use this essence of the body because I really want the maximum life, 70 to 84 maximum life on an amulet. That'd be really nice. So you can see this says upgrades a magic item to a rare item, adding a guaranteed modifier. So I know when I do this, I'm going to get that life. Oh, and I can't. This already has life on it. Let's pick another one. Looking through cold resist. Maybe I want cold resist on here. So I can right click this essence of thawing, click it on here, and now it has cold resist on it. So it's got 25% cold resist, 10% lightning resist. I could keep crafting on this if I wanted to. I'm not going to in this case, but that's something you can do. Now you do want to be careful because using essences or regals on an item that only has one mod will turn it into a rare that only has 2. You're not going to have 3 like you should. So you want to make sure you don't forget to augment. It seems pretty obvious, but there are mods that take up 2 slots. Like this one here has a tier 2 that is armor and increased armor. So it's got flat armor and percent armor on it. If I only had that one mod on there, I would see the 2 lines, armor and flat armor, and I might think I have 2 on there and forget to augment it. So you do want to hold Alt and make sure you're seeing that, yeah, those are all single line mods, you know, and I have 2 of them, so I don't accidentally turn it into 2 mod rare, because that means if you are going to spend more money on it, the next thing would be exalts. Now instead of 3 exalts filling the item, it's 4 exalts to fill the item. You want to be careful as well that you don't spend more on the item than you could have bought an item for. If you're in solo self-found, you can't buy items, so sometimes an item is worth just slamming a bunch of exalts on. But when you're in Trade League, it's very easy to spend significantly more on a piece of gear than you could have bought that same piece of gear for. So those are the main early crafting, is you just transmute, you augment, and then you regal. If at that point it doesn't have a good enough mods, I'd just be done. If you've got 3 good mods, maybe it's worth throwing an exalt or 2 on there. Probably still not in Trade League, especially as the league goes on and gear gets cheaper. If you have 3 that you look at and you're like, none of these are that good, there is the reforging bench that you unlock during Act 3. And if you put 3 of the same rarity of gear in, the same type and rarity, so these are all 3 dual string bows that are blue rarity, If I hit reforge, I will get a new one out that is unidentified and blue. So that lets you try again. So if you're looking for dual string bows are very popular, and then I'll identify it. And this got actually relatively high lightning for its item level. If you're looking for a specific dual string bow, or I think the later versions are called Gemini bows that do the same thing, bow attacks, fire an additional arrow, just pick up all of the ones that drop, and you can use this reforging bench, and you can transmute, augment, and if that doesn't get you anything good, don't regal it, just reforge it. For every 3, you get one more chance. It gives you a 4th chance. And then you can continue reforging them together. You do want to be careful that the item level, like I had showed on this Craft of Exile, the item level affects what mods can roll on it and what tier those mods can roll as. And when you reforge, I put 3 in. The lowest item level of the 3 was 36, so the item I got out was 36. So if you're getting like item level 70 stuff and you forge it with something that was 36, they'll become item level 36 as the new one will be 36. So generally you want to figure out what tier mods you are looking for and figure out what the lowest item level you're okay with. Maybe you're only good with item level 70. That gives most of the gear is available here, most of the mods. So another thing you can do, there's the recombinator. You open this a lot later. But when you recombinate, you get to pick 2 skills. So maybe I want this mana regeneration and lightning damage. And it gives you a cost to do the recombination and a chance for success. 39% chance. It's going to cost me 10 of these 18 I have. I do it, and poof, it failed. Those items are gone. Had it succeeded, the item I got would have been blue with just those 2 on it. So that's a way to take 2 items that you did your transmutation and augmentation on and got good mods on, but only 1 on each, and try for a bow that has, or a piece of gear that has both of the good mods at blue. Then you finish it off with an essence and make it rare with 3 good mods, and you might be done. That's usually good enough for getting through the campaign. If it got and early to mid maps, if it got 3 really good, it is likely worth throwing an Exalt or 2 on there, or even some of the new desecration mods. Desecration mods are extra nice because they can be the last thing. So you put 3 mods on, you put 2 more Exalts on, and then you desecrate, and then the desecrated mod gives you an option of 3, so you're more likely to hit something useful with that last mod. And you can finish off a piece of gear that way. You do want to be careful because just like with using Exalts on a piece of gear, this collarbone is worth like 10 Exalts. And if the ring I'm using it on is worth 2 Exalts, it's not really worth putting a 10 Exalt piece of currency in. I might as well sell this for 10 Exalts using the currency market, and then buy a ring that's worth 10 Exalts, and it'll be a better ring than most likely than if I use this. So generally you use those on things. You don't use currency that's worth more than the item you're using it on, usually. That's crafting. Next, we'll talk about if you don't want to go through all that work to craft, let's buy some gear. So maybe you've crafted a couple pieces of gear, or you found a piece of gear, a couple pieces of gear, and you're ready to buy a couple of pieces to finish out your build. So you're ready to do whatever the next step is. First things first, you want to look at your character and see where you're at, and see what pieces of gear are the worst and take them off. It's like, okay, usually when I get to maps, we already discussed before, the unique amulet is something I'm keeping, so I leave that. This body armor is specifically the body armor I want, so I'm going to keep that. This happens to have some resists on it too, so that's going to affect my searches, so I'm going to leave that on. But let's pretend I just got to maps and the rest of my gear is kind of garbage. So what I do is I just take it all off. My bow is only for offenses, and maybe it's already fine, so I don't really need to worry about taking that off. But I'll look at what I have. And then I'll look at my resists and be like, okay, I have negative 35% fire resist, negative 14 cold, negative 11 lightning, and no chaos resist. This I'm not too worried about early on, but I need a lot of resists. I need a lot of life. In my build guide and all of what I was doing, I've determined that really my jewelry, my 2 rings, is mostly about life and resists. So what I'll do is I'll hit the / key or the question mark key. That'll open up the market. And in the market, I'll leave it on instant buyout so I can buy the stuff right away. And I'm going to go through, and usually, since I know that resists on my rings, life and resist on my rings is what I'm going for, I'm going to start there. If you're playing a caster build, you can get cast speed in your rings. So maybe you want to start with your belt, or even your gloves, or your helmet, and get as good a gear as you can get there. And then see what you've got left over for room to put those extra stats on. But for me, I'm going to start with rings. So add a category ring. Any rarity is fine with me. And I scroll through everything else. Make sure you make it so it's something you can wear. So maybe you're just getting to maps and you made it to level 67. So you put 67 in so you know you can wear it. Some gear will have strength, dex, and intelligence requirements. So I would also put what you have in it for the max, just to make sure you can wear the gear. A lot of these miscellaneous won't matter for what we're doing. These trade filters, maybe if you've got 10 exalt to your name, you maybe only want to spend on these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces of gear 2 exalt a piece. Hopefully you'll find a couple for 1 exalt, but 2 is fine. And so you're going to put a cap of 2 exalts in, or whatever you're comfortable spending on each piece of gear. And then we get down to stat filters. In the stat filters, they recently added these pseudo filters. Early on, pseudo filters are going to be really good. So, total elemental resist, that is going to search for elemental resistances anywhere on the gear. I'm going to create what would be the exact same as this in what's called the weighted sum filter. This is how you would do it before they put pseudo in. It really simplifies as looking for elemental resistances. So if I'm looking for at least 90 resistances on a piece of gear, on a ring, my weighted sum here would be 90, and then I would do explicit. Oh, my fingers are on the wrong keys. Explicit cold resist, explicit lightning resist, explicit fire resist, explicit all resists, and that needs to be weighted at 3 because it gives you 1 of each. So 1 all resist is worth 3 total resistance. And then implicit cold resist, implicit lightning resist, implicit fire resist, implicit all res. And that also needs to be 3. So now this should be everywhere you can get resistances. So explicit, those are all the you can see on this piece of gear. It says ring, requires level 35. There's a bar, chaos resist. There's a bar, and then all your mods. Explicit is everything below that last bar. Implicit is everything between the two bars. So this one has an implicit of chaos resist and explicit of cold resist and chaos resist. So if I do a search here, I can see that this sum says 93, this says 93. You can see these are the same thing. And then what you can do is you can add in some additional filters. I'm going to turn this off for now because this isn't really necessary. Because it's really the same. It's just so much easier to do it. And maybe you want life, and this has a pseudo as well. The pseudo here will take into account the life you gain from strength. And then also if life happens to be an implicit, which most of the time you're not going to want it there, but it will do it. And maybe you want at least 100 life. So hit search. There's only two options out here. So this has 96 and 119 life. This also has rarity and some accuracy rating. Maybe you care, maybe you don't. This one has mana and cold damage to attacks. Maybe you care, maybe you don't. So with this, maybe you just go buy both of these rings. Now here's another thing you need to do. If you click on this travel to hideout, it's going to clear out everything that's here. But there is an open on website button. If you click open on website, it opens on the website. This won't get cleared when you move between, and it still has the travel to hideout button right here. So you can hit travel to hideout. I clicked it on the website. It brings me to the hideout, and it highlights the item. I'm not going to buy this because I don't actually need it. While I'm here, I could browse through everything else. You want to be careful that you're not overspending if you do so. And then I can click on the next one on the web browser. It's going to bring me to that hideout, and it's going to highlight that ring, and I could buy that if I wanted to. Again, I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to go back to my hideout. So in my particular case, because I'm further along, and this has all the filters up here. I might want chaos resistance. So maybe I don't need 90 all res, maybe I only need 60, but I also want at least 30 chaos resist. Using the pseudo, again, that'll search wherever it is. And I'm willing to spend 10 exalt on it. Nope, there's nothing that has all that with 10. Let's try, 20 exalt. Oh man, is there even anything out there? There is. The cheapest one's a divine. So I'm like, well, I'm gonna have to lower my expectations. Maybe I want to lower the amount of life that's on it. Maybe that's less important right now. 70 life would be fine. Nope, still a divine. Ah, man, it's got to be this elemental resistance then. Maybe I can only get 50 in a reasonable amount. Yeah, that's still 55 exalts. Maybe it's chaos resist. Let's do 20. You just lower. Okay, so 20 exalt. That's still a lot. Maybe I can lower things even more. 40. 10 exalts, and you lower things, you move things around until you get what you want. You want to pay attention that when you're looking at gear, maybe it has an open prefix or suffix that you can slam something into. So you could get something that's like, okay, you know what? This doesn't have any life on it, but I can try to slam life onto it. You got to go into it expecting that you probably won't hit what you want, but if you do, it's nice. And if you're spending 10 exalt on something that's just missing one stat, and you can slam that one stat, that might be what you want to do. So then I got some, now I've got rings. I'll just pretend I bought these rings. I'm still real low on fire resist. The next thing I would do is belts, because belts and rings are very similar, especially if you were doing this. You can go up here and I'm going to uncheck this, move this up to 60, move this back up to 100. I'm just going to change this from ring to belt and see what that gets us. And there are belts out here for an Exalt that has this. And what you can do is, let's say the most I want to spend is 2 Exalts, and then I want as many resistances as possible. Well, for 1 Exalt, I can get 82. On belts, you also want to have at least has 2 charm slots. You should get 1 charm slot through going through the campaign. So you don't need 3 because 3 is the cap right now. Eventually, they're going to make it so you can have more than the 3. But since 3 is the cap, you do want to add in here charm slot. And that's an implicit 2 charm slots. And that's going to cut out some amount that only had 1. Maybe, you know, you want to have as much maximum life. You know, you can sort by whatever you feel is most important, as long as these other requirements are met. So let's say that I now buy a couple more pieces of gear. And I'm looking at my gear and I'm like, okay, I've bought a few pieces of gear. My chaos is maxed, my cold is okay, my lightning is okay, but my fire is really hurting. This is where going back to the old method can be worthwhile. So what you can do is, instead of doing this elemental resistance, you can go to weighted sum, and in here be like, you know what? Cold resist, I only need a little bit of cold resist. I'm going to make this worth 0.5. I'm going to make lightning resist worth 0.5. I'm going to make fire resist worth 2. And then you would do that here as well, 0.5, 0.5, 2. And if you look at this, this is 2, 2.5, 3. That's still 3, so the all res is still actually worth 3. But if I had like, okay, well, this is worth 0.5, 0.53, then the all res is actually worth 4. You know, you just add everything together, and that's what gets you to your all res amount, so that it actually calculates appropriately. So now if I do this, you'll be able to see that everything is a little bit different, and it says the sum is 96, even though it's only 52 total elemental resistances. The sum being 96 is because it's taking those weighting into account. The 28 fire resist is counting for 3 right now. So then you do the highest sum possible, and that's going to give you ones that have a lot of fire resist. And then hopefully some other resists. So this is just the fire resist. This is fire resist, but it has some cold resist. It has less fire resist, but it has enough cold resist to make up for it. You know, and then so you change the weightings so that when you sort by this sum, it puts the ones that are actually better for you on top. You know, 3 is probably too much of a weighting. Maybe I need to do less than 3. And so I can go in there and adjust those and change what my minimum is. Another way to do it would be, especially if you're looking for the last piece of gear. So let me throw one more piece of gear in here. So now I'm looking for, I only have 1 piece of gear left, and I need it to have, so I need to get to this 75. 75 minus 31 is 44. So it needs to have 44 fire, and it needs to have 23 cold. So that's where I would go in here and do fire resistance 44, cold resistance 23. This would be gloves, so I'm just going to switch it to gloves. And there's no charm slots on gloves. So I can do this search. And for less than 2 exalts, and requires level 67, there's only one available right now. It's only one exalt. It does energy shield. I really should be searching for an armor base. I want at least 100 armor. That's going to come up and say it's not available. But that's because I want so much fire resist. So I really need to start balancing earlier than that last piece of gear. When I actually did this, I really limited myself because gloves was the last piece I put in there, but I had taken some other things out. And so I did limit myself dramatically on what gloves I could buy based on where I left myself with my resists. It would have been better to do things a little bit differently, a little bit more evenly throughout. Having a lot of resistances stacked on one piece of gear also makes it harder to replace later. So if I'm looking at these gloves, if I want to replace these gloves because I've got money now and I want to buy something that replaces them, I either need to replace a few pieces of gear to reorganize my resists again, or the new piece of gear needs to have 44 fire resist, which is really high, as one away from the maximum roll. And so chances are I'm really limiting myself on what gloves are available. So I would buy a few pieces if I was going to replace these gloves. Another thing to keep in mind is like I've gotten iron runes in my body armor because I want as much armor as possible. But I got fire resist in my helmet. I could put fire resist in my gloves. I could put fire resist in my boots. So that would help offset some of what I need as well. So keep that in mind. But also when you're doing these searches, it may take into account the fire resist that's socketed into it, because this only has 32 fire resist, but 12 socketed into it. So that means to get that fire resist that you need, you're relying on that socketed fire resist. So you got to keep some of those stuff in mind. It's a little bit long-winded, but that's what I do. Is I go through the least important pieces of gear. I do these searches. On gloves, a lot of times, maybe I need to add in physical damage to attacks, and everything else is good. So I'm willing to buy whatever, and then I want as much physical damage to attacks as possible. Doing the one that's when you click on a specific mod, it'll do by that mod, and having a mod that is with this green background, that's the abyssal mods. You could see that when I did that, I clicked on the abyssal version and it didn't bring this one to the top. So this one would cost me 2 divines. It has all the fire resist I need. It has the cold resist I need. It has enough armor. It has evasion, which I don't care about. Has a bunch of life. Even has rarity, which is not bad. Getting as much rarity as you can to fill up those last slots is nice. But it's secondary to defenses. And then it just adds a decent amount of flat damage, and that gets scaled with all of your other damage scaling modifiers. So this doesn't look like a lot when you're doing 10,000 damage, but adding this much damage to your attacks might add 2,000 damage in the end with all the scaling that you do. So that's how you would do some searches to buy some gear. After that, then you start to get into some really high-end crafting where you're using recombinators a lot more, using reforging bench more, using a lot of omens. Omens get very useful during crafting. Omen of homogenizing is useful because if you already have a blue piece of gear that has 2 good stats, making it more likely that your regal will add a modifier of the same type, which means it has the same tag, can be very powerful. So you wouldn't want to use that on a piece of gear that's worth 2 exalts because um, you could have bought a piece of gear that's better by selling that and buying the piece of gear. Um, so I'm not really an expert on the really in-depth crafting when it comes to using omens for things. I just know that in general, when I do it, I make gear that's worth less than the currency. So I just sell the currency and buy the gear. Um, I want to get better at crafting, and as I do, I will make more videos about the more in-depth crafting. But we've gone over the really, really basics here about crafting and buying gear. There's also additional crafting that I didn't really go over using the standard crafting currencies. Um, Using an alchemy often is a cheap way to get an item with 4 modifiers, especially if there's not a lot of mods that you don't want on an item. It might be worth just throwing an alchemy on there. I've thrown alchemy on plenty of rings and amulets because those tend to have a lot of good mods that going to 4 is usually good. It means you don't get to use essences because you're going right to rare, but it's usually a lot cheaper. Um, there are higher tier of the different crafting currencies now. Generally, these aren't that much more expensive. So it's kind of worth doing the tier 2 once you're above level 55 to make sure you get a high tier modifier. And worth using a tier 3 to make sure you get an even higher tier modifier. When it comes to regal orbs and exalted orbs, that kind of flips. Make sure you're checking the value of the currency, and these might change. And while these are relatively cheap today, something can change. The whole meta can change, and suddenly these are worth a divine apiece. So you do want to check before you use currency that you're not accidentally spending a lot of money when you don't mean to. There's also chaos orbs, which take something off and put something new on. So if you've got a piece of gear that's like, oh man, this would be an upgrade if only it had something else instead of, these couple of modifiers, then you can try this, but you are risking getting rid of the one modifier that makes the item good, and then the item is worthless. And these are usually worth a few exalt a piece. It can fluctuate, and earlier in the league it was actually worth less than an exalt, but it stabilized again. I think these are worth like 4 or 5 exalts now. So doing a chaos on a piece of gear can be useful, but it is more of an advanced thing. And then for anything that has quality, you generally want to keep it as maxed out. On armor, that increases the amount of armor it does, or energy shield or evasion. On weapons, it increases the damage they do. On magical weapons, they do different things, so you'll want to look at what it's doing on your specific piece of gear to see if it's worth it. Glass blowers increases the quality of your flasks, which makes them recover more health or mana. And gem cutters increase the quality on your skill gems, which you need to hold alt to see what the quality does. So on this one, quality added 20% increased area of effect for skills used by totems. So it was worth it for me to do that. It was also worth it on this, but it was not worth it on my galvanic shards, which I'm not actually using anymore. But when I was using it, the extra fragments was not a big deal to me. Wasn't worth using. Divine orbs are kind of one of the more premium currencies. Right now, they're worth like 200 exalts. So what a divine orb does is it changes the rolls within the tier. So if you look at this piece, this glove here, I have 42% increased armor and 44 maximum life for those first 2 rolls. That's one mod. If I use a divine on it, that could drop to 39% increased armor, or it could move up to 49 maximum life. It's not going to change the roll. This is already a tier 1. It's not going to become a tier 2. You can see it says tier 1 on the right here. It says prefix on the left. So it's already a tier 1 mod. It's not going to become a tier 2, but it's going to reroll the values within its tier. So if you already got a really good piece of gear that you want to move to being a great piece of gear, and it's worth more than 200 exalts, it might be worth using a divine on it to make those changes. Oftentimes, it's not. Then there's these couple that I don't even have: the Mirror of Calandra and the Hinokora's Lock. Again, way advanced crafting. Mirror of Calandra copies an item, but the copy can't be modified further. So if I make a perfect piece of gear that is like T1 everything, max roll everything, it's perfect, and it's a piece of gear that a lot of people want, people might want to mirror that piece of gear. Usually, they will provide their own mirror and give you some divines on top of letting them copy your piece of gear. But a mirror itself is, how many divines is that even worth right now? If I wanted a mirror and I had divines, 714 divines, each of which is worth 200 exalts. Yeah, that piece of gear needs to be very good to be worth mirroring. There's also Hinokora's Lock, which is 93 divines. But what that does is you use that in a piece of gear, and then when you hover over a piece of gear with a currency, like you're going to use it, it will show you what the end result of using the currency is before you actually use it, and you can decide to do something different instead. So if you're trying to make a piece of gear that's mirror worthy, you might use Hinokora's Lock to make sure you don't brick it halfway through. Very advanced stuff. I've never used one. I never will use one, because I just don't I don't have that kind of currency. I don't think I ever will. Yeah, and that'll finish up any crafting you do. You can do some of these crafts after you've purchased a piece of gear. You purchase a piece of gear, it's almost perfect, but you like, you know what? Let me throw an exalted orb, or let me throw a desecration mod on it. I'll throw some quality on it, and now my piece of gear is done. And that was a lot of information and maybe a little bit of rambling, but the basic gist is you work your way through, you get to maps, and you want to take and level set. Preferably get to 75 for all of your elemental resistances, and chaos resist is a benefit, but not really required, especially early on in maps. And use whatever resources you have available to you and whatever gear you've already found and make it better, or buy some off of the marketplace to finish things out and until you're comfortable. The important thing is, this is a game. Play the way that you have fun. If you want to craft every piece of gear because that's how you have fun, go for it. Just because it's not ideal to use an exalt on a piece of gear that's not even worth an exalt doesn't mean that you can't do it to have fun. I've done it plenty of times, and I will continue to do it, even though it's not optimal. It's the way I have fun. So, if you have any questions, you're welcome to stop by my Twitch. I stream most days. Have a good one.